prescribed time to go by before making the decision to become husband and wife. Our first obstacle had popped up 6 months ago while we were on our first romantic weekend as a couple. Jake's great-uncle, Tony Del Vecchio, had fallen and broken his hip. Once Tony was better, Gran announced that she really, really wanted me to have the wedding ceremony in the Catholic Church. However, between my non-attendance and Jake's divorced status, her priest had refused to officiate. Of course, my attempt at humor during that initial meeting with Father Flagg probably hadn't helped. I thought my comment that atheism was a non-profit organization was funny. The priest did not. Admitting defeat on the religious front, Gran started pushing for an elaborate reception, which would take at least a year to plan. There just weren't that many venues in the area of our small rural community, and those were booked far, far in advance of the date. Jake and I had compromised with Gran by agreeing to her vision of a fancy shindig if we could move in together while we waited for the big day to arrive. The question was how to accomplish that goal. Before falling in love with Jake, I had made the commitment to stay with Gran in order to keep her out of assisted living. Her mild memory issues made it unwise for her to live alone, and she'd refused to let me hire someone to be with her. Jake had made a similar vow to live with his great-uncle. Tony was no longer able to physically run the Del Vecchio cattle ranch, and Jake had agreed to become the official manager. Between Tony's and Gran's age and their issues associated with being octogenarians, neither Jake nor I felt like we could leave them on their own, even if it meant he and I couldn't live together until we figured out how to keep our loved ones safe without us with them. One thing that had helped our search for a solution was that Birdie and Tony had dated when they were teenagers. The only reason they didn't end up married was that Tony was 2 years older than Gran, and she had refused to drop out of school to become his wife. While waiting for her to graduate, Tony enlisted in the Marines. It was near the end of the Korean War, and when he turned up missing in action, Gran married someone else, my grandfather. Now that Birdie and Tony had both lost their spouses and reconnected, they were courting again. The obvious answer was for Tony to move in with Gran, and for me to move in with Jake. As to which couple lived where, with Jake running the day-to-day cattle operations, having us at the ranch was the sensible choice. That left Tony and Gran at her house. Unfortunately, Jake and I didn't think the elderly couple should be left without someone to help out, and neither of them was willing to have us employ a person in that capacity. You would have thought that with my father finally released from prison and living in Gran's garage apartment, he could have kept an eye on the aging Romeo and Juliet. Sadly, that would have been too easy. Dad had recently fallen for Catherine, a local artist who owned a gallery in town. He was now spending more time at her place than at home, and after all those years when he was incarcerated, despite his innocence, I wasn't about to ask him to sacrifice even a moment of his newfound happiness for mine. Happily, Gran's desire for Jake and me to produce great-grandchildren, even out of wedlock, overcame her need for independence. After a few months of brooding about the situation, she had grudgingly allowed us to hire her and Tony what we were calling a housekeeper. That gave us the perfect opportunity to find someone who had elder care experience. He or she would live in my old room and help Gran and Tony in whatever way they needed. We'd been extremely fortunate that when the local queen of Shadow Bend society, Nadine Underwood, went into assisted living, her caretaker, Beckham Jansen, had hung around the area taking short-term assignments. We'd counted our lucky stars that we'd been able to snap him up before